We started this thinking migration meant walls and borders. We ended up asking something different. What does it mean to have the right to stay home? Migration is more than crossing a border. It is a complex social phenomenon shaped by economic inequality, conflict, environmental change, political instability, family ties, and much more. That made us realize migration it's not just about movement, it's about the conditions that push people to leave their country. That question actually exists in human rights literature, a right not to migrate, something Pope Francis and migration scholars have written about. It's not anti immigrant. It asks whether states give people real conditions to survive, so leaving isn't their only option. That forces us to rethink words we use as synonyms our whole lives: migrant, refugee, and asylum seeker. A migrant chooses to move for work, for family, and can go home safely. A refugee can't. They've crossed a border, fleeing persecution or conflict, and international law is supposed to protect them from being sent back to their country. An asylum seeker is still waiting for that protection to be decided and granted. But those categories leave people out. What do you call someone who leaves Honduras because drought destroyed their crops? Not a war. Legally, not a refugee. But is that really a choice? The World Bank projects climate change could displace over 200 million people by 2050. In Honduras, entire departments have seen more than 7% of their population apprehended at the US border. Not because migration got easier, but because drought, violence, and corrupt governments left no other option. The first challenge isn't migration itself, it's economic, environmental, and political conditions that force people to leave. Challenge two is policy. UNHCR counts over 122 million people forcibly displaced worldwide, but legal protection hasn't kept pace. Asylum systems are backlogged. Public and political discourse often lumps everyone together as migrants, which strips away protection that refugee law is supposed to guarantee. That's why language matters. Calling everyone a migrant can quietly excuse governments from their duty not to send someone back into danger. So we didn't end with definitions. We ended with a harder question. If people actually had the right not to migrate, real safety, real opportunity at home, how many of those 122 million would have stayed?
One stereotype that's very alive right now is the idea that migrants are inherently criminals. During the 2024 US election, viral posts falsely claimed Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio, were stealing and eating people's pets. It was false, but it fed a bigger political narrative about a so called migrant crime wave. The data says the opposite. A 2025 review by Profit and Feldmeyer, published in Social Sciences, analyzed decades of criminology research and found no consistent evidence that immigration increases crime in the US. Some studies even show immigrant dense communities experience less violence. Yet, the same study found 45% of Americans still believe more immigration means more crime, versus only 5% who believe the opposite. That gap has real consequences. The study documents an 18-year-old detained by immigration enforcement on his way to volleyball practice with no criminal record, and a PhD student held for 6 weeks over unproven allegations. This is what scholars call half citizenship, being physically present in a society but never fully accepted in it, judged by a label instead of by facts. I let's ask the question: should we prioritize the right to migrate or the right not to migrate? Agro Navarro and Chueca Sancho described the right to not migrate or right to stay home as a state's obligation to provide the political, economic, and social conditions that let people build a dignified life without being forced to leave. This is grounded in real international law. The International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights recognizes everyone's right to an adequate standard of living. When a state fails at that, and people are pushed out just to survive, that failure is itself a rights violation, before anyone even crosses a border. Spain is a good example. It was a country people emigrated from, and only once its development improved did many immigrants return. Proof that development, not open borders, is what lets people choose to stay. I'd argue the right to not migrate has to come first, because the right to migrate is something you exercise after something has already failed at home. It protects the exit, not the cause. If we only defend the right to migrate, we're accepting that states can fail their people indefinitely, as long as the door out stays open, which is exactly how people end up in that half citizen limbo. That doesn't make the right to migrate less real. For people fleeing danger, it's essential. But as a priority, guaranteeing dignity at home is what gives people an actual choice, instead of making migration their only option.
Migration is shared responsibility between countries of origin and countries of destination, especially when it comes to refugees and asylum seekers. Countries of origin should address the root causes that force people to leave of their country, such as a conflict, persecution, poverty, or the human rights violations. By improving security, protecting human rights, and creating economic opportunities. Governments can reduce forced immigrations and give people to choose to remain in their communities. At the same time, countries of destination have both legal and humanitarian responsibilities. According to the 1951 Refugee Convention, they must provide fair asylum procedures and respect the principle of non-refoulement, meaning refugees cannot be returned to places where they face persecution. Beyond the law, they should also promote inclusion, prevent the discrimination, and ensure access to the essential services such as healthcare and education. According to the UNHCR, more than 122 million people uh, were forcibly displaced worldwide by the end of 2024, showing that immigration is a global challenge that no country can solve alone. Both countries must cooperate by addressing the causes of forced immigration while protecting those who seek safety. Only through shared responsibility, respect for human rights, and international cooperation can migration be managed in a safe, fair, and human way.
So now, talking about global citizenship and positive contributions, uh, as a global citizen, I believe that helping migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers go far beyond donating money or expressing sympathy. It means addressing the root causes of displacement and creating systems that allow people to rebuild their lives with dignity. According to the UNHCR, by the end of 2025, there were 41.6 million refugees, 9 million asylum seekers, and nearly 118 million forcibly displaced people worldwide. That means that one out of every 70 people on Earth has been forced to flee their homes because of conflict, persecution, or violence. One meaningful contribution is supporting refugee led organizations instead of making decisions for refugees. These organizations understand their communities' needs better than anyone else and should have a voice in creating policies and humanitarian programs. Research has shown that refugees leadership leads to more effective and sustainable solutions. Another unconventional approach is using technology to connect refugees with education, remote jobs, legal advice, and language learning. Artificial intelligence and digital platforms can reduce barriers and help people become economically independent and much faster. At the grassroots level, universities and local universities can organize mentorships programs where students help refugees learn the local language, understanding the education system, or prepare for jobs interviews. So, small actions like these create long term social inclusion instead of temporary assistance. Finally, we must raise awareness and influence policy public policy. That way, we can fight misinformation by sharing verified information on social media, signing petitions that protect asylum rights, supporting organizations that defend rights, and encouraging governments to invest in integration rather than exclusion. Refugees should not only be seen as people who need help, but as individuals who bring skills, innovation, and cultural diversity that strengthen out our societies. Being global citizenship a citizen means recognizing that migration that means that recognizing migration is not someone else's problem. It is shared globally responsibility, and real change begins when we move from compassion to action. Thank you.